When the British Empire reached across the Atlantic Ocean to colonize North America, British banking houses stood at one end of a long chain of global credit that stretched all the way to the new American frontier.
Banking only really came to the United States after the American Revolution. Before that, it was effectively prohibited by British regulations. And any banking that would have existed prior to that would have been banking done by merchants, even dry goods merchants, providing various forms of credit to their customers, or perhaps various bills, short-term forms of lending, but nothing we would formally consider as a bank.
It was a confusing economic period because so many different kinds of currency were already in circulation. In addition to British shillings and pounds, colonists were also using coins from Spain and France. Individual states also began issuing their own money of various denominations.
The first bank formed in the United States was formed by Congress in 1781. It didn't open until 1782. It was a part of the effort to straighten out the chaotic finances of the Revolution. That was the very first bank. It was in Philadelphia and called the Bank of North America.
One of its main supporters was Alexander Hamilton, who would become the first Secretary of the Treasury. But Hamilton had bitter disagreements with other founding fathers over both the necessity and the legality of a federal bank.
Of course, his great antagonist was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wanted to keep the government small. He wanted us to remain a nation of farmers. In Hamilton's view, banks were a key component of development. Jefferson's view was that, well, you know, the Constitution didn't mention banks. Maybe we didn't really need them.
While the new nation and its banks began to flourish, the debate over the role of banks themselves would rage for decades. By the 1800s, there were almost 700 private banks in the United States. The gold rush had an enormous impact on the rapid expansion of banks in the United States. By the early 1850s, almost 1,600 banks existed throughout the country. Less than a decade later, another momentous event in American history would change American banks forever. The Civil War not only divided the United States, it came dangerously close to bankrupting the Republic. By 1860, there was still no national currency, and the Civil War made a chaotic condition even worse by creating an avalanche of competing currencies. Confederate states printed their own bills. Banks in Union states did the same.
Before the Civil War, all the banks of the country issued their own banknotes. Each one issued several denominations of banknotes, a 1, a 5, a 10, a 20, maybe a 50. So take, say, 5 different denominations of notes and 1,600 banks. You had 8,000 different appearing pieces of paper, all representing United States dollars.
At the end of the Civil War, the federal government mandated a single currency for the reunited nation. It enforced that order by imposing a 10% tax on earlier currency, essentially making it worth that much less.
In 1866, at the end of the Civil War, the federal government passed a law saying state banks could no longer issue these notes, and so we got federally backed currency.
At the beginning of the 20th century, the city of San Francisco had begun to come of age. The gold rush era had given it a substantial population. By this time, Wells Fargo Bank had become deeply entrenched in the economic infrastructure. Then, everything literally changed overnight.
In April 1906, a great earthquake leveled San Francisco. But the earthquake was not the worst of it. The firestorm that followed the earthquake destroyed all of the remaining infrastructure of virtually the entire city.
The calamity was also a trial by fire for another San Francisco financial institution, the Bank of Italy. The actions of its founder, A.P. Giannini, following the earthquake are still the stuff of legend.
After the earthquake struck, A.P. made his way back up to the city and found the city in ruins. And the fire was starting to spread down in the financial district. Well, he and some bank officers decided to take what they could, the gold and the cash and the books, out of the bank. And they put it in a wagon and covered it over with some orange crates to disguise it from looters, and took it down through the crowd streaming out of the city. And when he decided to take that money out of that bank, put it into that wagon and get it out of town, he did it quickly.
Many bankers wanted to stay closed for up to 6 months. They weren't sure the city was going to survive.
AP said, "That's wrong." He said, "People need help now. If you don't start lending money, there will not be a San Francisco." He said, "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to put a desk out on Washington Street Wharf, and I advise all you bankers to beg, borrow, or steal a desk and follow my example." And he began making loans to rebuild the city.
Giannini had originally opened the Bank of Italy in 1904. By 1918, he had expanded to 24 branches in 18 California cities. 10 years later, there were 292 branches throughout the state. The creation of a vast network of bank branches will be Giannini's legacy.
He saw the potential of a thing called branch banking in America when no one had ever applied that concept before. There were banks that had small branches and they were separate offices, but what AP's vision was to create a statewide network of branches.
Giannini's vision eventually grew into the largest banking firm in the United States. It's estimated that 68 billion checks flow through the banks in the United States every year. The Bank of America's Regional Processing Center in San Francisco handles more than 4 million checks itself every day.
Fundamentally have not changed check processing in 30 to 40 years. Checks are, without question, still one of the preferred methods of moving money that customers and businesses still employ.
Up until 1950, checks were merely pieces of paper that banks processed by hand. That changed with the development of a revolutionary new encoding system. Strategically designed numbers were added along the bottom of checks that served to identify them to electronic readers.
We refer to that as MICR. It stands for Magnetic Ink Character Recognition. It basically tells you everything about that check. It'll tell you what bank that check is drawn on. It'll tell you what Federal Reserve District that bank is in. It'll tell you the individual account number and what account it belongs to within that financial institution.
In the 1950s, scientists at the Stanford Research Institute helped develop a new machine that would be able to read those ink numbers electronically. They gave their new computer a name, IRMA.
Electronic recording method of accounting was revolutionary, and by virtue of getting that accepted across the United States by other banks so that they could exchange checks back and forth technologically, that just changed everything.
IRMA could process more checks in one day than a bank's accounting department could handle in an entire year. Up until this point, banks had done their bookkeeping by hand. The development of mechanical accounting devices helped speed up the process and made record-keeping more practical. But it was still a laborious procedure. The technological ante was raised again by a little piece of plastic that would change everything.
The banks quickly realized that the credit card was a natural for them because banks are in the business of helping us make payments and they're in the business of granting credit. The credit card does both.
The basic idea of a credit card originated in the United States during the 1920s, when a few oil companies and hotel chains began issuing them to customers for purchases made at company outlets. The first national credit card plan was Bank AmeriCard, initiated in California by the Bank of America in 1959. It expanded to other states in 1966 and was renamed Visa 10 years later. The convenience of the credit card encouraged the development of another piece of plastic that acted as a key in the revolutionary new device that would change the basic concept of banking, the automated teller machine.
What you're talking about is a laminated piece of cardboard with a little bit of magnetic strip on the back. If you had suggested to someone 40 years ago that that would be the primary way most people would deal with their bank, they'd have thought you're nuts.
There are more than 850,000 ATMs in use around the world, and every day they dispense an estimated $2.5 billion in cash. Automated teller machines were first patented in 1968. The ATM was originally designed to deliver a predefined amount of money in a sealed envelope. It came out of the device like a vending machine would deliver a soda. ATMs evolved into dispensers that would release various amounts of cash up to a preset limit and allow customers to conduct other basic banking functions.